Welcome everybody to today's partner webinar. My name is Sam Krebs. I am the channel sales manager here at PreVeil. So if you ever have any questions about your partner agreement or you have questions about joining the partner program, feel free to reach out to me directly, or you can reach out to partners@preveil.com. I'm also joined by a couple of my colleagues here that you see on screen, Jamie Leupold, our Director of Channel Sales and Alliances, and Greg LaRoche, our VP of Product. On the next slide, we will see our agenda, where we'll give a quick update on the number of PreVeil customers that have been assessed at a perfect 110 score on their CMMC assessment. Jamie will provide some updates on CMMC and MSP and MSSP services that customers are looking for the most. And Greg will conclude the partner webinar, the content portion of the webinar with product updates. And as always, we'll finish with a Q&A session. I do want to give a few updates on the partner program as well. One of them being our partners have helped PreVeil grow by about 60 new customers already through Q2. So we've got about 2 or 3 more weeks until we finish up Q2, and we're sure we're going to have a lot of help from our partners throughout that process. We've had over 24 customers score a perfect 110 score on their CMMC assessment, with a lot of you partners helping throughout the process. So we want to thank you all for helping out throughout that long process with us. Also, as some of you may know, you have the opportunity to join the PreVeil Partner Network, which would allow you to get your logo and contact information on our website. So if you have any questions about that, again, you can reach out to me directly, or you can reach out to partners@preveil.com. With that being said, I'll pass it on over to Jamie, who will share some updates on CMMC.
Thanks, Sam. So I think an important update, point of clarification that was announced at the most recent Cyber AB Town Hall. And for those of you that didn't have a chance to view that, we will provide a link to that at the conclusion of the presentation. Some new information that Matt Travis shared, and important that we cover this because the industry in general was under a different interpretation, and I had personally mentioned this on a previous partner webinar, as well as on a previous session that we had with one of our partners. And that's as far as CMMC relating to both cloud service providers, but more importantly, MSPs, MSSPs. So we already know that any cloud service provider that stores, processes, or transmits CUI does have to be FedRAMP moderate or FedRAMP moderate equivalent. Our understanding previously was that under the final rule, those were the only entities that would require their own specific certification, and in this case, it is FedRAMP. It was understood that any MSP, MSSP would not be required to obtain a level 2 certification. They could certainly do so on their own free will, and it would help ease the burden, the assessment burden for their customers. They do have to participate in the assessment. But the new information that was shared from Matt Travis is that if an MSP/MSSP/external service provider that is not a cloud service provider stores, process, or transmits CUI on their own systems, that they do require their own independent level 2 certification in order for the OSC that is using them to pass their certification. So new information. Matt admitted that this was a new interpretation. They will be updating the CMMC assessment process, the CAP, to reflect this. So we are now, encouraging our partners and customers to make sure if they use an ESP that is not a CSP to store, process, transmit CUI, we encourage them now to go ahead and get their own level 2 certificate, specifically around those services that they offer, and especially where they might be storing, processing, transmitting CUI. The good news is for PreVeil partners, this largely won't impact you. If the PreVeil system is configured correctly, you should not have any access to any CUI in the system. That lives exclusively within your customers' environments. However, if you're using maybe some sort of RMM tool, or if you're using some other components that may directly be able to access your customer's CUI, then it's important to note that you might need your own CMMC Level 2 certificate. If we do have any questions on this, feel free to use the Q&A functionality. We'll get to as many questions at the conclusion of the session today as possible. But again, I just wanted to raise this important clarification that the Cyber AB has recently mentioned. Again, this was from the May Town Hall. We will provide a link at the conclusion of today's session. Next slide. So, as Sam mentioned, we have a PreVeil partner marketplace. We do have several organizations that are already participating in that. But I do think it's really important for the audience in general to really understand, what are the services that customers are looking for. And if you do have the expertise and the capabilities to provide these types of services, feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you and see if it makes sense to include you in our partner marketplace. And quite simply, it comes down to, of course, what are the CMMC related services? How can they make things easier for our customers? And I typically bucket those, into a few different categories based on the extensive conversations that I've had with, dozens of our customers. We'll cover those on the next slide. And those really are fundamentally a few different things. Number one is what I would consider compliance as a service. And when we think of, any sort of compliance framework, there's really kind of three core components. There's the people, the processes, and the technology. And I think of compliance as a service as largely covering the first two. It's the people and the process support. Organizations that either need help with documentation, they want help with maybe mock assessments, they need somebody to help them strategize and plan for how to get themselves to a compliant state. But they might have internal IT resources, or they're working with an existing MSP, MSSP, so they don't necessarily need those services today, but they need somebody to walk them through the compliance process. That's where compliance as a service, there's many different terms it falls under, but generally speaking, that's one bucket. The second bucket, which really encompasses the next couple bullet points here, would be more of a cybersecurity compliance services. That's when we're getting into the more technical controls. How do we do things like SOC SIM support? How do we do managed endpoint? Because again, for a lot of our customers, this is a challenge. They might not have the internal cybersecurity expertise for them to hire internal staff to do ongoing SOC SIM services, ongoing vulnerability management, endpoint protection, patch management, etc. It becomes a significant challenge, a significant cost undertaking. So many times it makes a lot more sense to outsource that to a qualified MSP/MSSP that can provide those types of services on an ongoing basis. Again, with, of course, a focus on compliance as well. And then the last would, again, be that more assessment support, mock assessment services. These might be more point-in-time gap analysis type of assessments, where most often our customers are saying, I think I'm pretty good, but I want somebody to come confirm what I am doing right, what I'm doing wrong, and help me fix what I'm doing wrong so that I can get compliant. These can sometimes turn into ongoing services, monthly, annual type of services. Other times, customers are looking for more a true point in time with maybe some remediation support on the back end. So that's fundamentally, the services before we get into the actual assessment. Of course, to do the actual assessment, you do have to be an authorized C3PAO. We do work with several of those as well that we also do recommend to our customers. But these are really the services to help our customers get ready. So again, if you are providing any of these types of services, you're not already part of our marketplace, please do reach out. We'd love to speak with you. And if you are providing them and you're in our marketplace and you want to try and generate additional business, feel free to reach out and we'll see, what opportunities we have to maybe do some more joint marketing around that. So with that said, what I'd like to now do is turn this over to Greg LaRoche, our VP of Product and Compliance, and he's got some exciting new roadmap and product demos for you.
Thanks, Jamie. Appreciate it. I'm going to share my screen, but before I do that, just going to let you know what we're going to cover. So there's a few interesting new features that are available in the product now, recent releases that are available in the PreVeil.com downloads page, the most recent version. But I'm also, aside from a couple of things in there, I'm going to show you a sneak preview of a prototype build of a feature that's coming later this year that's very, very exciting. And that should be a lot of fun to talk about. So let me just jump right in. So I wanted to point out a couple things in the latest release. So right now, the release that's available on our website is 5.8.2. 5.8.2 includes a few new things that are want to mention very quickly before we go on to look at the prototype of our next generation drive system. So one thing you're going to notice right away is that there's a new menu down here in the left corner called the Quick Start menu. This is something we've wanted to put in the product for a long time, which is how can we help a first-time user or an early user in the system get more engaged with the product and learn how to do some of the basic things in the product very, in a self-service manner without having to go out to the knowledge base and look things up, or without having to open a support ticket or whatever, or search on the web. It'd be much nicer if I just had an easy place I could go and see how to do something I'm trying to do. Like, I got a warning that I don't have a recovery file, right? Which means my Express account is in jeopardy. We're not on Express right now, but if I were, we could say like, oh, you need a recovery file in case you forget your password. You could be in a bit of a bind since PreVeil doesn't store your passwords for you. So then I can click that and it'll tell me like what it is. How do I create my recovery file? And I hit show me and I get a nice little diagram that tells me where do I go to do it? What are the steps? So just some real basic usability information that should, we're really round out the first time user experience. And this is an extensible menu. So as we add critical new features, we can extend that. There's also take a tour at the bottom, which is takes you to a video that's a product overview. So it gives you kind of a tour of the whole system. So that's a very nice thing that folks should be aware of, but you do have to upgrade to 5.8.2 to see this. So upgrades are encouraged. The other we did a couple other things in 5.8.2 aside from a lot of bug fixes and enhancements to the synchronization performance. We also enhanced the drive search tab quite a bit. So the new search engine here, right now you're searching by file name or folder name. That's the same because the rest of the data is encrypted and we can't search on the encrypted stuff. But as you put in file names and folder names, you'll notice the performance is faster. There's no keep searching button for long lists. It gives you a status bar instead. So just in general, a much better experience as we look through things. And once the search is completed, you can then filter your results and you can actually filter by, if you just want to see the shared folders. So you'll see now that this is a more powerful interface. And so we're pretty excited about that too. All right, so that's the current product. And these are features that are available today. And again, we encourage you to have your customers upgrade and take advantage of these features. Because with every release, we're also including a lot of fixes and things that have been discovered in the field, enhancements. A lot of administrative improvements have been made. I'm not going to go through them now, but it's definitely worth moving up to the new version. All right, so now we're going to show you something really cool. So Drive, as it is now, is currently based on a file system watcher or listener, if you will. So it's watching, it's listening your local media, and it pays attention to when you do things in Explorer and can then add files into your PreVeil drive. It's then going to kick off encryption and synchronization to the cloud, and vice versa when you open something or when you trying to retrieve something. It works in reverse. If you're editing a cloud file through cloud editing, for example, it's going to go fetch that for you and do all that automatically. So that's a great system, but because we're interacting with the file system directly as a path or a client on the machine, there's a limited amount of information we can know about what the user is doing in the file system. And as a result, we can only know what we can know. And that includes things like, user has, we know a file has left Drive, but we don't know where it went, things like that. So we're introducing a re-architecture of Drive with two big main advantages right off the bat. One is you may notice that things that are not synchronized on your machine directly don't appear in Explorer in the current implementation because they're not represented in the local media. And since that's what we're watching, you don't see anything in Explorer if your files are all in the cloud. And if you synchronize things locally, that's when you can see them in the Explorer view. But what if, for example, we could enhance the experience within Drive so that even things that are in the cloud would be visible? So this is where we're headed. This is a prototype now, and don't get too excited. We're still developing these features, and if something breaks, that's why. But what you're seeing here is a representation of a cloud drive. It's very similar to what Microsoft is doing with OneDrive, where it's a virtual representation of the Drive system. It's not actually physical media, and it can include things that are in the cloud or things that are on the physical media. And you can interact with all those things either here in your left nav, for example, or you can, click the root and navigate over here, same as you would do in Explorer. And you notice some new icons here, these little clouds. These mean all of these folders are in the cloud and they're not actually here on this machine present. And if I want to click on something or open something up, I have new options. So here, if I just click on this, it's going to open. It's going to fetch it, open it, and it's going to put it in a temporary state on the media. It's going to bring down a copy. But I can also opt to always keep it on the device. And this is very similar to what we're doing today with syncing. And if I want to always keep it on the device, it's going to go fetch it for me. And then it's going to give me a solid circle here saying like, this is synchronized locally and it's not going to get removed unless the user removes it. So, and again, this was just a second ago, this was a cloud only file. And so that's pretty cool. And you can do the same thing at the folder level, right? So if I have a folder that I want to put in the cloud that has been synchronized, I can drive it back to the cloud if I want. Everything in there will go back to the cloud after it's done doing that. So a bunch of new things, a bunch of new capabilities open up when we can do this. Like not only can you stay in Explorer to do all your PreVeil file work and Drive, but you can also now control much more granular information around what users are doing. So we're going to be able to log all kinds of new file system events because everything happening in this virtual drive we can see. And so that, and we by meaning our technology, our client software. So that's pretty exciting. It's going to give us some new capabilities. We're going to be able to do things like prevent a user from exfiltrating a file out of the drive. Something we can't do today. If a user has permission to a folder, they can do whatever their permission allows them to do. And if they pull something out of Drive, they have permission to do that. They have edit privilege, right? So they can definitely do that. Whereas in the future, when we have Cloud Drive, we'll have another layer of rules we can put around this space, and we can restrict user actions even further. We can log with much more granularity. Just a whole bunch of new use cases open up in the world of Drive. So we're pretty excited about this. Right now, the code name for this feature is called Cloud Drive. I think when it gets released in the product later, it's actually just going to be PreVeil Drive still, and it'll be replacing the existing Drive system. However, that this represents a large development effort. We're still development is underway. We're building out pieces of this functionality so that we get good interoperability between the desktop app and this Cloud Drive system. And we are building that out, and we expect later this year to be able to make some significant announcements around when we're going to have the beta availability and when the general availability will be released to our customer base. So I just want to spend some time talking about that. It's something very cool we are working on. Our engineering team is a very large portion of them is dedicated to this development effort, and we just we're all pretty excited about additional capability this is going to bring to our customers and to our business.
Thanks, Greg. That's a very exciting update. I know that's a big project the team's been working on for several months now. So we're really excited to see Cloud Drive, come to be. I think that'll be fantastic. I know we were going to share the link to the town hall, just for folks that wanted to kind of see that firsthand. And we can also put that in chat. And just in case anybody has questions about that, I would refer you just go back to the video. Matt Travis did discuss it in some length, and I think it's an important distinction. And again, the nice thing is it doesn't impact PreVeil partners that are administering PreVeil for their customers. They should not have access to directly store, process, transmit CUI on their own company assets. If they are providing administrative services, they would merely be considered a security protection asset in that case. And so we do have plenty of time to answer any questions. I know we've got a couple that have come through. If anybody else has any questions, please do use the Q&A functionality. And I'm more than happy to answer as many questions as we can. We've got plenty of time here. I will start with the first question. If I've developed customer docs, including SSP, policies, procedures, is that considered CUI, even if I have to access the CUI they're storing on PreVeil? So first and foremost, customer docs, such as SSPs, policies, procedures, etc., those are not considered CUI. We have to remember that the first rule of CUI is it's got to be developed on or behalf of a government contract. Your SSP, your policies, procedures, those are company proprietary. They would not be something that you would be handing to the government. In any case, certainly not as part of a funded contract. So therefore, that would not be considered CUI. There's one exception, I believe, and that is a C3PAO specifically has to treat an SSP and other assessment docs as if it were CUI. It's not technically CUI. An authorized C3PAO does have to treat that information as if it were CUI. Next question, I've sold PreVeil service along with endpoint configurations, compliant documentation. Am I considered an ESP or just their IT consultant? This is a good question, because there are cases where some partners will purely resell PreVeil or they're reselling other cloud services. They're not directly managing those on their behalf. And the first rule of ESP is, are you dealing with either CUI or are you dealing with security protection data or that security protection data being processed on your systems? So that's the important distinction to keep in mind around that to qualify as an ESP. To qualify as an ESP, either that CUI or that security protection data, security protection assets does have to reside on your own systems. So if you're a PreVeil admin for one of your customers, you would be considered a security protection asset in that case because you are administering PreVeil, even though you're not directly accessing the CUI. If they happen to share CUI with you for some particular reason, now you would actually, be in scope as a CUI asset. If you're just reselling the license, they do their own administration of PreVeil. You are not, providing any sort of, you would not be considered an ESP in that case. Greg, I'm going to let you take the next question. With this new feature, can you set it to always keep files on cloud, so no copy ever on a local computer?
Yeah, I'll just talk right over.
Yep.
Sort of. I think the important question to clarify is, does the user have to access that CUI? Do they have to view it? Do they have to edit it? Do they have to operate upon it in any way? If they do, they got to pull down a copy to do that, right? And when that happens, now their endpoint is back in scope because they're processing, storing, they may not storing, but they're processing and transmitting. So, so if they never have to look at it and you keep it in the cloud in our system, sure, that can work. If they never need to ever see it, you can definitely keep things in the PreVeil cloud and have them stay there. That's a capability we have today, actually, with using the cloud lock function we provide now. Later, when we have Cloud Drive, it'll become a little more buttoned up. But also, it'll be the same deal. If the user has to operate on the file, they got to pull a copy down so they can operate on it.
Yeah, I think the important distinction there too is that while in Cloud Drive and when using Cloud Lock, they are able to work on the documents and it does open a temp file, it does not keep a persistent copy.
Right.
So that, I think that's important because a lot of folks are looking more for control of the documents to ensure they aren't leaving the PreVeil environment. And that is a great way to do that because it doesn't allow you to keep a local persistent copy, which then has the potential to being moved out of the PreVeil file explorer. So I think that's a important distinction. Yes, anytime you're using PreVeil and you access a document, you are technically processing it on that local endpoint, unless you're accessing it through a virtual desktop infrastructure. So we do always, remind folks that even though you're using PreVeil, it does bring that local endpoint into scope once you're accessing the document, including merely viewing it. Okay, let me see the next question. When using PreVeil, scoping the client for CUI storage and use, I assume the client endpoints are still in scope, and I'll have to implement a robust security program to blanket their systems. That is, yeah, that's correct. With the exception of, again, if PreVeil is running in a virtual desktop infrastructure or VDI infrastructure, that is the explicit only carve out that the DoD did allow for in the CMMC final rule and in the CMMC 2.0 scoping guide. If it's not in a virtual desktop and it stores, process, transmits CUI, then the endpoint is in scope. And that includes, the GCCI environment, GCC environments, really any cloud that you're using. If it's doing the processing locally, then that endpoint does come into scope. Do we have any white papers on actual configurations that meet the 110 controls? We do. So through our PreVeil Compliance Accelerator course, we have introduced an endpoint course that will walk you through a compliant endpoint configuration plus PreVeil to achieve full compliance with all the applicable controls. Question that says setting up recovery accounts. I need a little bit more detail there. That's typically done through approval groups, which is done through the PreVeil admin console. If you want to provide a little more detail.
Yeah, I think the key difference is if the account is managed in an org, then normally account recovery is handled by the admin, right? Through, as Jamie just said, using the recovery techniques that are available to administrators for managed accounts. I think what I was talking about earlier when I was showing it as something a user could do, that's for the unmanaged accounts, typically what we call PreVeil Express accounts. Those are people using the free portal. They have to have a password because that's what encrypts their key. If they forget that password, they're kind of hosed. So because PreVeil doesn't store passwords. So that was when the recovery file is most important for Express users, unmanaged accounts. If you have a managed account, then you're going to have a recovery set up through your admin and they can recover your account. So that's the normal way. But of course, for unmanaged accounts, that doesn't exist. So that's why the recovery file is so important.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah. With the tools that MSPs supplies, such as endpoint, MDR protection, if those tools are not FedRAMP, does it cause a problem for our clients? Great question. And there's been a lot of confusion around FedRAMP and CUI assets and security protection assets, security protection data. And I think the important thing to keep in mind there is that the only time FedRAMP is required is if an asset stores, processes, or transmits CUI. Typically, endpoints, MDR, those types of services can be configured not to actually ingest entire files. And if that's the case, that's a security protection asset. If it's merely looking at a hash of the file, then it's considered a security protection asset. If for some reason it does need to read the entire file, then you may need the FedRAMP version of that. So I typically encourage folks to avoid that scenario, avoid putting CUI into cloud services that aren't FedRAMP, if that's the case. Great.
One or two questions today.
And let me see, I've got a couple more questions coming in. If I'm using PreVeil on a workstation and working with CUI on that workstation, is the router, switch, firewall that connects me to PreVeil in scope, or is it just the workstation in scope? Good question, and that's largely how that workstation is configured. If you can configure it to, and typically this can be done with, let's say, a client-side firewall, or if you VLAN off, that particular workstation, if we can provide some sort of logical and or physical separation from the PreVeil workstation to the rest of the network, then the rest of the network is considered out of scope. So it comes down to architectural decisions, networking decisions at that point, but it's pretty common to, remove the rest of the assets out of scope. And that's a great way to do that. Okay, not seeing any other questions come in. If you do have other questions that come up, feel free to reach out to partners@preveil.com. If they're more compliance related, feel free to reach out directly to partnercompliance@preveil.com. You can also always schedule time with our team if you have compliance related questions. Really appreciate everyone joining this month, and we look forward to speaking with you on the next town hall, which should be coming up in August. All right, thanks.